Okay, well, welcome everyone to this press conference announcing the formation of the National Radioactive Waste Coalition. We are a coalition of over 40 organizations around the country that have come together to fight for solutions to the nuclear waste crisis. And so to start with, my name is Tim Judson. I'm the executive director at the Nuclear Information and Resource Service, one of the founding members of the coalition. And I will be introducing our panel of speakers and also offering some introductory comments about the coalition. So, it's a natural question, why are we forming a large national coalition now? And the reality is that, while we are seriously facing the climate crisis and we're seeing the impacts of that around the country, there is another environmental crisis facing the U.S. That is much more unseen and unheard of at this point, and that is the nuclear waste crisis. This is a crisis involving radioactive waste that is threatening the health and safety of communities throughout the country, endangering drinking water, and posing risks of massive radiological disasters. Just as examples of the scope and scale of this, we have over 15,000 abandoned uranium mines throughout the country that are leaking radioactive material into drinking water and into the air and communities that surround them. This is more abandoned uranium mines than we have McDonald's restaurants around the country. We have hundreds of contaminated nuclear reactor sites and weapons facilities dating back to the Manhattan Project over 70 years ago. There are regions throughout the country still suffering from radioactive contamination from nuclear weapons testing fallout. We have over 1.7 million fracking wells around the country producing radioactive waste of water that's dumped in landfills, sewage plants, and even roadways. And we have, on top of all of that, 90,000 tons and growing of irradiated nuclear fuel, mostly sitting next to lakes, rivers, and seacoasts. And it's this last radioactive material that contains over 94% of all of the radioactivity produced throughout all of these industrial processes that are affecting the country. Now, to give a sense of why this is so urgent, there was a report last month that estimates that drinking water for more than 170 million Americans in all 50 states, quote, contains radioactive elements at levels that may increase the risk of cancer. So we are already facing a public health threat to this country from radioactive material that is only getting worse as each day goes on and more radioactive material is produced by the nuclear weapons and nuclear energy fuel chains. The radioactive waste crisis is already so widespread that impacted communities have nowhere to go. There's nowhere safe that left to go to that isn't potentially going to be impacted by this crisis. Communities where these wastes are produced and stored have also been ignored and abandoned by the federal government and, of course, the nuclear industry. Just as one example, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which was originally enacted 40 years ago this year, has failed to find a solution to the irradiated nuclear fuel problem. We are no closer to finding a repository or other long-term management site for nuclear waste than we were in 1982. Both the White House and Congress have proposed only false solutions that would make the problem worse in the last several years. And we're only seeing this problem increase under the Biden administration as the Department of Energy seems to be ramping up efforts to promote false solutions to nuclear waste that are going to endanger more communities around the country and fail to produce any solutions for communities that are impacted and targeted for nuclear waste. On top of all that, is just as one example of the policy failure that we're talking about, the nuclear industry has not paid a dime to the Nuclear Waste Fund in nearly 8 years, while the Department of Energy is twiddling its thumbs with things, with proposals for consent-based siting for nuclear waste. This is unacceptable, and the National Radioactive Waste Coalition has been formed to bring impacted communities together to defend the health and safety of our environment and address the nuclear waste crisis. We are informing the public and organizing in communities across the country in areas where nuclear waste is produced and stored, and communities that are targeted for radioactive waste, and regions that will be major transportation routes for this waste if the Department of Energy's and Congress's plans move forward. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers today who represent the breadth and the scope of this coalition. And to start with, I'll introduce Rose Gardner for the Alliance for Environmental Strategies located in New Mexico. Rose.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that very much. So as Tim said, there's impacted communities, and I happen to be a resident of Eunice, New Mexico, which is in the southeast corner of New Mexico, near the Texas state line. Eunice is about 5 miles from a low-level radioactive waste dump named Waste Control Specialist Interim Storage Partners. This company has acquired a high-level radioactive waste license from the NRC to store high-level waste, including spent nuclear fuel rods. Another company, Holtec International, has chosen a site in New Mexico, 35 miles from my home, and is pending a high-level waste license from the NRC. Also, both New Mexico and Texas oppose this high-level radioactive waste in their states. Other necessary measures must be taken to ensure this waste remains where it is. We do not want your waste. Our group intends to commit time, energy, and know-how to stop this intrusion by companies which seek to gain monetarily but offer no guarantees about final dispositions of the waste. This could remain here for all time. Let me be clear, we do not want your waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Next, I'll pass it to Deb Katz, the Executive Director of the Citizens Awareness Network in Massachusetts.
Hi. As Tim said, there's a crisis in high-level nuclear waste in America. The nuclear industry and the federal government abdicated their responsibility to develop a solution. My town was host to the first commercial reactor, the Yankee Row reactor. I live 4 miles from Yankee Row in Western Massachusetts. My town was chosen to host Row because we're a working poor farm community. We couldn't afford to plow our own roads in winter before the reactor came there. The corporation promised that when the reactor shuttered, all the waste would be removed. One of many broken promises. Millions of curies of high-level nuclear waste remain on site with no place to go. Now the industry is promoting a stopgap solution, interim storage. Their target, working poor Hispanic communities in the Southwest. This is environmental racism. The industry pits reactor waste and targeted communities against each other over the final disposition for its toxic problem. The National Radioactive Waste Coalition formed to combat the industry's false solutions and its environmental racism. It is immoral to force communities to choose between short-term economic survival and long-term health and safety. We join together to demand real solutions based on sound science and environmental justice. In the short term, the waste must be secured and protected at reactor sites. Clean water, clean air, clean land, and a safe place to live are a human right. We can't let the industry's profit-driven bottom line or a captive regulator to determine America's future for the most toxic waste we have ever created. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Deb. Next, we'll hear from Jesse Deerenwater, an organizer with Citizens Resistance at Fermi 2, an Indigenous-led organization in Redford, Michigan.
Greetings, y'all. My name's Jesse Deerenwater. I'm Gaduagi, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and a member of Citizens Resistance at Fermi 2, CRAFT for short. We're based in Wawiamtanong, where the curved shores meet, aka Detroit and metro areas. This is the traditional homelands of the Nishnabe Three Fires Confederacy, which is made up of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi's people, which I am blood and family with. I originally come from a Cherokee community in northeast Oklahoma, though. This was where I was first introduced into the insidious industry, nuclear industry, by way of a uranium processing plant. This processing plant ended up poisoning our people, beings, and the land. It is still in need of major remediation because of the lack of care on behalf of the industry and the lack of accountability on behalf of regulators. But here I am again in a community where my fellow Indigenous people, as well as people of culture, poor and working class people, are again exposed to radiation against our will. The group I'm with, Craft, uh, is building a future full of renewables and alternative energies that are free from radioactive waste. For years, we have tracked, reported on, and shared the story of our Fermi 2 nuclear reactor and the utility owner, Detroit Edison. The reactor has a long history of ill happenings. Workers had fallen to their deaths, suspicious trespassers had been arrested, and contaminated water had been dumped into the ground soil before the reactor was ever fired up. More recent issues are the degrading neutron absorbing materials in the spent fuel pond, which keep this highly radioactive waste stable. Also, a cancer study and toxic algae blooms are some of the more recent things and issues that we have tracked and are tracking. The National Radioactive Waste Coalition has formed around earthly and universal principles that both the group I represent and myself, as a Gaduagi, a Cherokee person, are fully aligned with. This includes securing radioactive waste, addressing the crossroads where climate and environmental justice meet, and since the issues have been on Indigenous lands and involved with Indigenous people, and we are the most historically impacted, one important element to this coalition is the Native and Indigenous organizing that will be taking place throughout the campaign. Right now, Leona Morgan, a Diné woman from New Mexico, and I are doing the groundwork to secure space for natives from all over Turtle Island, pushing back against the industry and the uranium fuel chain so we can come together and create intentional relationships, skill and network building in the hopes of creating a solid front of skilled folks with the voice and resources needed to get this done within the campaign or within the coalition. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Jesse. Next, I'll introduce Bryce Gustafson with Citizens Action Coalition of Indiana.
Thank you, everyone, and greetings from the Hoosier State. I am Bryce Gustafson, program organizer with Citizens Action Coalition. I'll start by saying that because we have no nuclear power plants here in Indiana, we don't have to wrestle with the day-to-day issues of nuclear waste. But as the Crossroads of America, we have good reason to be involved with the NRWC. Along with the vast networks of interstate highways and railroads, both our northern and southern borders are framed with shipping waterways. So whenever the federal government renews the discussion about housing the tens of thousands of tons of nuclear waste that's scattered across this country, our ears perk up and we start to get nervous. We know that if any interim storage facility is approved, that waste will be coming through our backyards by those roads, rails, or waterways. So why wouldn't we want high-level nuclear radioactive waste transported through our communities? Well, for folks that have never been to Indiana, I'll let you know that our infrastructure is in less than stellar condition. That certainly adds to the frequency of the transportation accidents that routinely occur here. Interstate 70, which runs straight through Indianapolis, right down the road from where I'm sitting, is one of the deadliest highways in the country. Just yesterday, a train derailed in a suburb west of Indy. Fortunately, this time they were not hauling hazardous materials. Shipping accidents on Lake Michigan and along the Ohio River are less frequent, but still occur. Of course, Indiana is just one state, but if we scale up our issues across the rest of the United States, moving all that waste across the country is likely a disaster waiting to happen. Statistically, it's guaranteed. According to the American Petroleum Institute, heavy truck accidents occur about 6 times for every 1,000,000 miles traveled. So if we just focus on the thousands of truck shipments alone, we can expect at least 15 accidents every year. Even a low speed accident can damage the waste casks and release radiation into the environment. A more severe accident could cause an evacuation event, as has happened with other chemical releases here in Indiana and across the country. One can only imagine the long-term human, environmental, and economic impacts such an event would have on a community, state, or region. Finally, back to Indiana. We are already #1 in toxic emissions per square mile, and we perpetually rank towards the bottom of many other environmental and quality of life rankings here in the US. The last thing we need is to take the unnecessary risks of adding any more strain to our citizens' health and well-being and the broader destruction of the environment here. For these reasons and many more, we at Citizens Action Coalition support the NRWC's nuclear waste solution. We are grateful for all the past, present, and future work the members of this coalition have done on these issues. And of course, we are very happy to be part of the fight. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Bryce, and to all the other presenters. And so just before we get into Q&A, I also wanted to kind of give you a sense of some of the resources that the coalition is bringing to bear as we launch and are going to begin working, for the goals that we've laid out. So if we can bring up the website, you'll see this is the National Radioactive Waste Coalition website. This is the homepage where you can see a map that includes impacted communities around the country with nuclear waste, nuclear power, and nuclear weapons facilities, abandoned uranium mines, and then we have an About Us section that details the principles of the coalition. This is principles we are committed to as a movement, which I think are worth looking at in terms of what distinguishes this coalition from others. We are committed to stopping the production and reprocessing of radioactive waste. We believe the isolation of radioactive waste is critical for protecting all living things, from the tiniest organisms in the soil and water to all the humans living on our planet. And we are committed to working to ensure this isolation is accomplished. We are committed to preventing the unnecessary movement of radioactive waste. We commit to stopping the transport of radioactive waste for storage at any interim storage location or Yucca Mountain, and working to make the radioactive waste as safe as possible at or near the sites where it is now. The local community should have input into how the waste is stored at all these sites. Our work will be grounded in respect for all peoples, and we commit to rejecting oppressive solutions or actions and preventing the creation of sacrifice zones. We will fight to ensure that environmental racism is not used to decide where waste should be stored. And so as this coalition is being built out, one of the first things that we've done is to put together a resource page with information on a number of different issues related to radioactive waste and nuclear waste crisis. You can find that on the resources page that you see there. And then as one of the inaugural actions that this coalition is taking to lay out the policy agenda for the National Radioactive Waste Coalition, we also have produced a set of principles for humane and equitable nuclear waste policy. And with that, I'll share that with you now as well. These are policy is a policy agenda that we have articulated to Congress and the White House, laying out the principles by which we will be gauging all the policy proposals coming out of Congress and the White House on nuclear waste to determine that it is both equitable, humane, environmentally just, and scientifically sound. So that includes, first, stop making nuclear waste. This is, as we've laid out, this is a problem that has already become too big for us to manage safely with the technologies and the resources that are available now. We cannot continue adding to this crisis before we even have ways to deal with it. All solutions must prioritize human health and environmental protection. This is fundamentally about protecting the health of our environment and our drinking water and our communities for generations to come. The solutions or policy proposals have to acknowledge and combat environmental racism and injustice. The nuclear industry has a long history dating back to its earliest days of targeting Indigenous, people of color, and other vulnerable communities to bear the impacts of nuclear waste. And we've already seen the burdens of this industry build up over the last 80 years. That needs to be acknowledged and combated, because we cannot continue adding to problems and failing to address the impacts that have already occurred. We must stop subsidizing the sources of nuclear waste. Every dime that goes into producing more nuclear waste is a dime that is not protecting our communities from the radioactive waste crisis and the impacts that it has. We must protect and support communities already adversely affected. So communities that are already suffering from environmental contamination, communities that are already storing nuclear waste, have to have resources invested to protect them and to ensure the health of their communities and for generations going forward. And communities must have the first and the last word when it comes to the siting and storage of nuclear waste. So this means that, in all of the discussions that have taken place so far about, consent-based siting of nuclear waste facilities, we're seeing really empty promises about what consent actually would mean in those processes. And for any community to be targeted for nuclear waste, for any community to be storing nuclear waste, they must be able to have meaningful consent up until the very last moments when these decisions are made and implemented. And so these are the standards by which we will be measuring the federal government's policy proposals, on nuclear waste. And so far, what we've seen is virtually all of those proposals fail. And that's what really sort of has driven the urgency of forming this coalition and why we're undertaking this project now. So with that, we'll open it up to Q&A. And since this is a press conference, we will be prioritizing questions from the media. And I'll rely on our facilitators to unmute representatives of the media to ask questions or present them in the chat. One question that we expect will come up soon is, what's our position on the consent-based siting process that the Department of Energy has started recently and is undergoing right now? And I think for perspective on that, I might pass it to Rose Gardner to talk about the way that communities in the Southwest are viewing this proposal by the Department of Energy for consent-based siting.
Well, thank you, Tim. We've been through the consent-based siting issue before. In 2017, I believe, the DOE went around the country and visited different states, trying to get input from the public regarding consent-based siting. But would you believe they didn't come to New Mexico and they didn't come to Texas? And these are the two places where these dumps are sited. So I don't know what the Department of Energy is thinking. I think they're being quite unfair and not giving the public the opportunity to give the proper input. You have to be, have feet on the ground here to understand what's going on. We are in the biggest petroleum producing area in the country. And right now, what they're going to do is trying to put this high-level nuclear waste here and possibly damage our livelihoods. When contamination occurs, these dumps are around here, who's going to clean it up? Who's responsible? Nobody wants to say they're responsible. So what I can tell you about consent-based siting is it doesn't seem to be fair. They've got a new plan about a task force, but I'm not impressed. I'm sorry. Nothing's worked up to now. We need to stop making this stuff.
With that, we have a question from one of the representatives of the media, Jessica Songeroth with Nuclear Intelligence Weekly. She asks, do you see the best chance of challenging interim waste plans playing out in the courts? Sorry, we have one question from a representative of the media, Jessica Songeroth at Nuclear Intelligence Weekly. She asks, do you see the best chance of challenging interim waste plans playing out in the courts? And I'll open that up to anybody on the panel who wants to address it. Deb?
Well, there will, of course, there are groups, and the states, both New Mexico and Texas, are going to file. This will slow the process down. This has happened before. It's not clear in the long run whether they'll prevail or not, but the hope is in slowing this process down, that some sanity can in fact happen, in which there is the work that needs to be done, which is not about targeting the most vulnerable communities, but actually using sound science, actually impaneling science, both physicists, geologists, all of the experts that are needed, experts in consent-based siting, because what the DOE is doing is a farce. This has nothing to do with what is needed in consent, which is really complicated. So it will help to slow it down, and hopefully saner minds will prevail in the meantime to actually come to grips with the problem that has been ignored for decades.
Great, thanks, Deb. And anyone else want to offer thoughts on this? The one thing I'll add as well is that there are potentially threats, involving nuclear waste storage, that the courts aren't going to be viable venues for the public to engage in, and that is partly due to the process that's been taking place over the last 20 years, whereby the industry has been suing the Department of Energy for damages to cover the costs of storing nuclear waste at reactor sites, and we're very concerned that this could eventually be opened up to include interim storage of nuclear waste at these private storage sites that are proposed in New Mexico and Texas. And those lawsuits have no viable point of intervention for members of the public or even the states to intervene. And so we're very concerned that the path that the federal government is going down with these false solutions to nuclear waste could actually end up foreclosing opportunities for public involvement, which is extremely concerning given the widespread environmental impacts, environmental justice issues that could result. We have a raised hand from John Wilkes. We'd be happy to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Yes, thank you. My name is John Wilkes. I'm the Vice President of Chapter 63, Veterans for Peace, Albuquerque. I speak from you from the National Nuclear Sacrifice Zone, known as New Mexico. I'd like to make a few comments if I may. Can you hear me?
Yes, but we're taking questions right now. We're not opening up for comments.
Okay, so then the question has to be, how can an organization apply for membership in the coalition?
Certainly, great question. We actually do have an application form for membership on the website, which
we'll be working
organizations.
in 24 hours. It's not working yet. Put your contact info in the chat, and we will get back to you. We're brandy new.
Yes, this is our launch day, so not everything is up and running right now, but will be very shortly. But yes, organizations that agree, that subscribe to the principles that are laid out on our website and on the application form, can join the coalition.
We have a question from Michael Lee in chat, if you want to get that to.
Oh, Michelle Lee, actually.
Michelle, my bad. Apologies.
So Michelle's question is, can you elaborate on the level of subsidies going into the production of nuclear waste? So as I mentioned in my comments, there are a number of subsidies, including direct subsidies being paid to nuclear power plants by state governments and electric ratepayers in several states, including New York, Illinois, and New Jersey and Connecticut. There's potentially, billions, tens of billions of dollars in subsidies being proposed through the Build Back Better legislation and the bipartisan infrastructure bill in Congress right now. these would all subsidize the production of more nuclear waste. There's also indirect subsidies, such as the failure of the Department of Energy to come up with a cost estimate for managing nuclear waste that's under a court judgment in 2013 has prohibited the DOE from collecting funds from the industry for the Nuclear Waste Fund, which are mandated by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. That would be, at least at the past rates, a subsidy of $800 million a year to this industry, which is already added up to close to actually $6 billion over the last 8 years. So this is which is growing every year that the DOE sits on its hands and proposes twiddles its thumbs with issues like consent-based siting, as opposed to actually figuring out a long-term management plan for nuclear waste. And I'll rely on our facilitators to flag any other questions that are in the chat or anyone else has raised their hand. And and just to reiterate, those organizations that are interested in joining the coalition can email us at nrwcmedia@gmail.com, and we will email you an application form that will be posted on the website live tomorrow. Follow-up question from Jessica Songeroth. Thanks, Deb and Tim. Tim, does that mean you think the DOE will act without Congress to take transfer of the waste for storage at an interim facility? So just to clarify, so under what I described, it would not actually require DOE to take ownership of nuclear waste from the industry in order to potentially move forward with the federal government paying for centralized interim storage. This would essentially be the government covering the quote damages to the industry by facilitating the transfer of waste from reactor sites to these interim storage sites that the licensees of these nuclear power plants still own. So that would essentially be a sort of an end run around the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. We've also seen something similar coming from Congress in the last few months with a proposal by Senator Dianne Feinstein that worked its way into an appropriations bill in the fall that would authorize a quote pilot program for centralized interim storage to be funded out of the Nuclear Waste Fund, but that would essentially be a pilot program with no size limitation on how much waste could be transported under it. And so this would potentially be another way of doing an end run around the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to implement a fall solution for nuclear waste at taxpayer expense. These are serious proposals that we're very concerned about and that need to be brought to the surface and opposed now.
I mean, in a sense, one of the issues in this is that, in fact, the nuclear corporations do not have the money to ship the waste that's trapped on site at this point. And the idea of being able to access money from the DOE is to basically subsidize the nuclear industry once again to get the ability to get its problem off-site, to ship it somewhere where it sort of disappears for as long as possible, because they don't have a way to deal with any permanent solution to deal with a toxic waste that they created and have yet to deal with in any reasonable or responsible way, except to target Black, brown, and working poor communities to basically suffer the insult of what they have been unable to deal with.
We next have a question from Carol. Oh, go ahead. Anyone who wanted to address that? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut someone else off if that's what happened. Okay, so we next have a question from Carol. The Biden administration wants to keep and possibly expand reliance on nuclear, citing climate change as a reason. How will the coalition challenge this? And who wants to address that question?
I'll speak for CAC, who belongs to the coalition, but right now, as we speak, and this might be the first bill in the country that deals with construction work in progress for small modular reactors. That is going through the Indiana State House. It's Senate Bill 271. And what that allows the utilities to do is to charge ratepayers for everything, whether these small modular reactors ever work, whether they're viable, kind of redundant there, but and whether they ever finish the process. That means we would be on the hook, and they haven't. It's a the camel's nose through the tent type of thing at this point, but they haven't determined. We haven't determined, I should say, how much money we're talking about. But we're talking about billions of dollars for sure. And every time that we've had that discussion here in Indiana for construction work in progress, that is a no. It's a loser for consumers here in Indiana. So on that front, we are fighting tooth and nail to stop this bill and any future bills like it.
Additionally, here in Idaho, we are trying to educate the power companies and different things about the cost and the time and all that stuff that nuclear power create. You know, if we need more power, nuclear power isn't a quick a quick solution. Sorry. So we're really pushing the solar, the wind, that type of thing, trying to educate the public and our political representatives about, you know, why they should stick with the cleaner and fighting the whole thing that nuclear energy is a clean energy, which, as we all know from what you've heard today, is not a clean energy.
I mean, one of the issues in this is the reason that interim storage is coming up is because the nuclear industry, to present itself as clean and green, has to make its waste problem disappear. And if it can't make its waste problem disappear, if the waste is stuck at sites throughout the country, then they really have an advertising problem at this point in terms of how to present themselves, how to manage their image. And basically, the nuclear industry is failing at this point. Reactors have been closing. In fact, the issue of Biden's, you know, and the support of the administration for subsidies is because they can't keep themselves going at this point. So the only hope they have is, which they have every 10, 15 years, is somehow to reinvent themselves once again as a renewable energy source, which of course is a complete travesty, because the only reason they can try to present themselves that way is because nuclear power, the tragedy of nuclear power is that the radiation is invisible. I mean, if they were forced by the government to actually have it come out with a color, then the issues of what they dump into the air and what they dump into our rivers would become evident, and people would be horrified by it. It's the fact that they've been able to slip by in this way, or the fact that they cause problems with thermal pollution. They release hundreds of millions of gallons of hot water into our waterways. They control our waterways at this point, and no one knows that that's going on. And they have been brilliant at hiding the effects they have, because basically the effects have been felt by communities that have no power and have no voice. mostly. And so they can say anything and they get away with it. And that has to stop. And that's part of the work of this coalition, because once you wake people up to what's going on, they can't go back to sleep. And that's our job, is to wake people up, not just among ourselves. The job is not to talk to ourselves at this point, but to talk to the whole environmental movement, to talk to the groups taking on climate change, for them to understand that these are twin issues, and that in fact, we can't in fact argue with each other over what's worse. What we have to do is unify and fight for a clean environment, a safe environment for our future, for our present, in fact. The industry loves to divide us in terms of arguing over what's worst. But in fact, what we have to fight for is what's best.
Does anyone else want to address that?
Jesse here. I just want to say that you know, it's not just greenhouse gases. I mean, it's not just carbon. You know what I mean? It's greenhouse gases. It's man-made climate change. You know, man-made climate destruction, which includes heat, which includes pollution, which includes all the things that nuclear reactors add to the earth, you know what I mean? Whether it be the heat from the core, the radionuclides in the water, the air, the 4.5 million gallons of wastewater dumped back into our precious Lake Erie shores every day. All that contributes to this, you know, this destruction, this turning of the world that we're facing. And in order to keep turning it, but turn it into a future where we can all thrive, you know, it's not going to include nuclear generation. You know, we can't have justice. We can't get rid of an oil refinery in our backyard here in Detroit and replace it with the small modular reactor. It's just same injustice. But that's all I wanted to add to that is all.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. And so, yeah, and just kind of to wrap up, you know, I mean, we're talking about an industry that has failed to address it, you know, failed to solve its own pollution problems for over 80 years. And the idea that we're gonna then hire this industry to solve the fossil fuel industry's pollution problems is patently absurd. And we just can't afford to invest in those kind of false solutions. And so that's, again, the reason why, you know, one of this coalition's principles, you know, is to phase out the production of nuclear waste to start with, and to return to those principles. So with that, I don't see any more questions from the media. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up for today. You know, we thank you for participating today, for joining us, and you know, and we invite you to stay tuned and you know, to what this coalition is going to be doing in the months and years to come. And thank you for joining today.